5. I don't ever do that. I'm just hamming it up.
Won't you listen to reason? Will you open your eyes? It's a wonder what you'll find with an open mind. You may be surprised. Yeah, gotta get away from this illusion for the sake of the world. This delusion has gotta go.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. Today is December 19th, 2010. And if you saw bits of last show, you know that the phone situation here in our public access TV studio is that the phones didn't work last week. We have great news. The phones still don't work this week. I'm Matt Dillahunty, joining me this week, Tracy Harris. And we found out about it with enough lead time, and of course we saw the mistakes from last week, that we actually bothered to do a little bit of homework. So Tracy's brought something cool to talk about. I flagged a bunch of emails and discussion points as well, but let me get the regular announcements out of the way. This program is live on public access television. It's sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. The ACA has weekly meetings every Sunday at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road, beginning around 11:30, except for the first Sunday of the month when we host our lecture series at the Austin History Center. The next lecture will be January 2nd. Hopefully everybody will be done partying in time to get to the History Center by 12:15, because Don Baker is going to be talking about the mechanisms of religious evil at that particular lecture, and we're looking forward to that. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio podcast, which I need to change that from bi-weekly to kind of weekly, because the nonprofits, which you can find out more about by going to nonprofitsradio.com, that's P-R-O-P-H-E-T-S. We had our last episode of the year a week ago Saturday. Now, see, you're confusing me. And when we come back, we're going to switch to a weekly format, keep it roughly the same length, but if we go a little shorter, it's not going to be a big deal. And we're going to try to do it weekly. That way, if we have to skip a week, we end up just skipping a week and not 3 weeks, which is what happens when we missed weeks, or 6 months, as was the case last year, where we just weren't having shows. In addition to the various media outreach efforts, the ACA also sponsors a number of other activities, including happy hour every Thursday at the Dog and Duck Pub at 17th and Guadalupe. And beginning Monday, January 10th, if you're in the Austin area and you're a member or a friend of a member of the ACA, we're going to start hosting Godless Gamers at my place. It's a board game, card game, party game group. Just some fun things to do on Monday nights. And for more information, you can, on any of that, or to find out more about the ACA, you can email tv@atheist-community.org. That goes to myself, the co-host, a lot of people behind the scenes. And if you're looking for information about the board game group, you can go just email president@atheist-community.org. That goes to me, and I can get you information on how to get to where we're playing the games and how much room we have and what games we may be playing. So. Since there are no phones today, obviously I can't be mean and hang up on people, which seems to be one of the things people find more interesting than other shows. This is the last show of the year. When we come back after the new year, we'll still be in the studio. Hopefully we'll have the phones working. If we don't, the plan is to go ahead and get something like Skype or some other voice over IP set up, and we'll get that information out and put up on the website. You can find out more about the ACA by going to the ACA's website, www.atheist-community.org, and there's a calendar of events, a frequently asked questions page, a bunch of news items and other things. And after this show's over, we get together for dinner, and we're still going to Threadgill's this evening. It's 301 West Riverside Drive. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to come to any of our events, except possibly for Godless Gamers, where I kind of like to have people I know coming to my house. But after the first of the year, though, we will be changing where we're having dinner, so stay tuned for that. We'll make an announcement. It'll be up on the website as well as on the show. And with that, the next 45 minutes are yours.
You gotta do bars.
I know. Oh, I gotta do pause bars.
Okay.
They'll figure it out.
Okay. Yeah, the thing I wanted to talk about, it's funny because I had reams and reams of notes that I didn't bring all the notes, but I do know what I want to talk about, so that should be okay. I had an exchange with a theist who identified as an agnostic predominantly, which was interesting, but they were a theist. They acknowledged they were not an atheist, so they were a theist agnostic. And during the exchange, I got a miracle story, which we're familiar with. You get these miracle stories like that people call in and they say, "Well, I had this thing happen to me and I couldn't explain it," and then they start to talk about it. And
they explain it.
Yeah, and what's always interesting to me is there's like this initial description of it, and then when you start to ask questions about it, it starts to unravel a bit, and you always start getting deeper and deeper into it, and then the person begins to sort of try to explain more and more what's going on, and sometimes the story will change up to where it conflicts with what was said originally, and sometimes what was said originally makes more of something that when you start asking, well, how do you know this fact that you're putting forward, and they'll start to explain how they know it, and you're like, okay, well, that's not really confirming that that's what occurred.
Your story doesn't have anything to do with like waking up in the middle of the night, does it?
Actually, it doesn't. I will say that that's one of my first things.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, the first thing I always want to know when someone tells a story about a personal experience where it's like a unique thing to them, where they say, this happened to me and I was on my own, my first thought is always, were you napping? Had you gone to bed? Were you going to bed sometime soon?
I've had people start the stories and say, I was awakened in the middle of the night and there's a figure standing there, and I'm going, we already know enough about how the brain works that you have no basis for claiming that you actually saw anything other than the waking dream state and all these other things right after you wake up. Or I got this premonition in my sleep and I woke up and 3 minutes later it happened. There's all kinds of things like that.
You cannot trust what's going on in your brain as you're going to sleep, as you're getting tired. When you wake up, when you haven't been awake for very long, I mean, you
can be wide awake in the middle of the day, and still there are situations where you can't trust what your initial impressions
but at
of
times
the situation
when there's like odd chemicals pumping and coursing through your brain that don't normally course through your brain in waking hours, you should not trust what you encounter during sleep hours or near sleep hours. But in this particular one, this actually was a story that involved a lot of people, like a number of people, and it was interesting to me because at the end of the story, I guess my question was sort of like, what was the miracle? So I was sort of stunned about why this would be a miraculously impressive story. And I'm just going to read the exact first account of what I was provided, and it says, out of curiosity, I ask how you can scientifically prove how this happened. And I think what they really meant by that was what I'm about to tell you. How would you give it like an explanation, a natural explanation? And the story says, a young girl between the ages of 3 and 4 drowns and dies. A man who has failed every CPR test in his life brings her back to life. Later on, she tells her mother that she has a little sister named Emily. Emily does not exist. The little girl says she does. When asked who told her this, she said a lady in white did in a white room. Keep in mind, the hospital had no white rooms where she was at, and the nurses were not wearing white. Later on, the mother is pregnant. The little girl says, this is not Emily. It is not. It is a boy. Later on, the mother is pregnant again. Same thing happens, another boy. The family decides they are not going to have any more children, but then the mother gets pregnant one more time. The little girl says, this is Emily, and a girl is born. For the record, this is a true story with many witnesses. How is it that this little girl saw this lady in white in a white room while she was dead and then predicted the birth of her sister? This is why I am not atheist, because I believe something or someone does exist and there is some kind of place after death besides 6 feet under or ashes. Can you spot the miracle?
I don't see a miracle. As a matter of fact, I have nothing but questions and things to point out where there's just glaringly obvious mistakes and holes.
Okay, thank you.
You get to do it.
Yeah, I'll start, and if you want to, I mean, sometimes when you
do you
inject
take them
things,
pretty much in order?
Okay.
Because if you miss the first one, I'm going to jump all over it.
But there's a lot of other dialogue that occurs after this. But first, let me just say that my first line of response to anything like this is that you telling me a story is not confirmation that what you just told me even occurred.
Right.
Anyone can go on the internet and make up a story. So first off, I don't take any stories like this at face value. But what I do like to do when someone's handing me a story like this sometimes is to say to myself, what if what the person is telling me is completely accurate? What then would I make of this? Like, what if I, for example, experienced this firsthand and this happened where I was? And what would I make of it?
The first thing I spotted, and I don't know if you actually hit on this or not in the commentary, was right off the bat, this girl drowns and dies. A man who's failed every CPR test in his life brings her back to life. Mm-hmm. Do you rip that to shreds? Because
well, the first question I have about it is, I'm going to say, to me, if we're going to call a miracle something that is like stretches the bounds of reality, I've honestly got to say that the only miracle I see in the story is that an adult repeatedly failed a CPR test.
Yeah.
Because I'm just going to say, when I lived in Florida, I grew up in Florida, lots of water around Florida for people who don't know, tons of lakes. It's a peninsula surrounded on all sides almost except for the top by ocean. And if there's one thing they teach you in Florida and one thing they are hyper aware of and conscious about, it's water safety. Mm-hmm. Children in Florida, when I was a child, I don't know what they're doing now, but in middle school, they started teaching you about the age of 12 CPR and got all the children certified. So you went into your physical education class at school, they would do a 1-hour CPR training course, the children would go up, repeat the instruction, get their certification card. The next day or the next, depending on how often you had phys ed, the next hour that you took for physical education, the rest of the class went up, did theirs, got their certification card. Mm-hmm. When you go to the certification websites, for example, the American Heart Association offers CPR certification here in Austin. If you go to the American Heart Association website to see how you get your certification, it says you go in for the class, and on the fact page it says, when do I get my certification card? And it says everyone gets their card at the end of the class. There is nothing on the fact page to answer the question, if I fail, how soon can I take the test again? And that is because no one fails this test. I'm not going to say that I know for a fact that no one has ever failed a CPR class, but you either have to be the worst test taker ever, or you have to have horrendous stage fright because you do have to do it in front of a group of people, or you have to be less cognitively capable than a 12-year-old.
Well, my thing is that this is like the second line in the story, okay? A young girl drowns, and it says, a man who has failed every CPR test in his life brings her back to life. Okay, first of all, it's got all the telltale signs of exaggeration and glurge, and,
right.
and I don't find much of anything that comes after this believable, so I'm already objecting here for the same reason that you do, that I think it's kind of silly to say that somebody failed the CPR test. But if you think about it, let's assume that it actually happened, that there is a guy who failed multiple CPR tests.
I did, I assumed it.
I have taken one of those CPR certifications 30 some odd years ago or whatever, and probably did another one in the Navy. I don't remotely think that I'm qualified to perform CPR on anybody because I haven't had any current modern training. Don't barely remember, what I took. It's
right.
It's
the
just kind of there.
certification is good for about 2 to 3 years.
A person who has repeatedly failed the test is somebody who has repeatedly taken the course and therefore may have a decent understanding. But it's not surprising that somebody could perform something akin to some CPR that they heard about and revive somebody who drowned.
Right.
It's certainly not surprising if they've had training in resuscitation.
Like, it's better than nothing, is what you're saying.
And
if
it's
you get
even
remotely
less
close.
I mean, it would be more miraculous for me to do it, having forgotten all this, than somebody who repeatedly takes
Right.
the classes and fails because
Right.
they're getting a
You've
constant
got to pick up.
refresher.
You'd think they have to pick up something.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
But even if one of the 5-year-olds walked over and smacked her on the back to revive her, that doesn't make it a miracle.
right?
Yeah, so I'm nowhere near a miracle.
Well, the other interesting thing I had was that the story indicates that she died, and then this guy came over and revived her.
Yeah.
And then later it describes her in the hospital setting.
Yeah, where's the proof of death?
Right. That was my next question, was if she's revived at the point that she finally gets competent medical person, because this man clearly is not competent. I mean, he can't pass the CPR certification that children pass, so this is not what I would call competent. And later I was informed that he was the most medically competent person at the scene, and that, but the point is, yeah, if you have an incompetent person who fails a test, that part of that test is determining death, like going and seeing if the person is breathing, checking to make sure their pulse is going. And you don't perform CPR on somebody who's still breathing and someone who still has a pulse.
Well, the most this guy could determine is that she's not breathing, not responsive.
You would
he cannot
hope he
certify
could do
her
that.
dead.
You could hope he could do that, but he can't pass the CPR certification
Well,
course.
yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that gets me. It's like, in my mind, I think to myself, it's ridiculous to assert that someone would forget to check breathing and pulse, or it's ridiculous to assert that someone could fail at trying to determine if there's breathing and pulse, but I can't imagine the person that would fail a CPR training course that requires that you check breathing and pulse.
But even, my point is that even if you had verified that there's no breathing and pulse, that doesn't necessarily mean they're dead.
Correct.
Death
No,
is a
I
very
understand.
difficult thing to define, and
Right.
as we
Right.
get better and better at reviving
Is
people,
there
our
activity?
definition,
Is there activity
yeah.
in their brain? You know, and that's the other thing, is later he asserted that if the heart and the breathing had stopped, then all the other systems had stopped. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. The other systems shut down more slowly as the oxygen doesn't reach them. What
Yeah.
you've done with the breathing in the heart is that you've cut off oxygen to the rest of the person's body, which means that at that point, the other organs start to suffer.
Right.
When the brain goes down, then you've died. So,
Speaking of brains going down, we're going to go on to the next line or so.
okay. So anyway, this, so we can't say that how dead she was. We don't know how well this person could or could not have performed CPR. So the idea that someone was brought back to life under this circumstance is very mundane. There's nothing, I mean, I couldn't find any reason to think that it was miraculous after questioning the person further. So later on, she tells her mother that she has a little sister named Emily, and Emily does not exist. And this generally would be known to a 3 or 4-year-old as an imaginary friend, which is something that is also not uncommon. Children have imaginary friends. When we did the show on childhood indoctrination, I don't know if you remembered this, but one of the things we discussed is that psychologically speaking, children are thought to have these imaginary friends as a means of coping with stress in some cases. So this child nearly drowns. She goes to the hospital, and suddenly she invents an imaginary friend, which is a mechanism that a lot of children use to deal with stress. So I'm like, okay, so she comes up with this imaginary thing at a time when kids would come up with an imaginary thing like this. She insists that Emily does exist, and when she's asked who told her, she then says a lady in white in a white room. Now, I'm going to let you know, I'm going to like kind of ahead of here, that I am informed later that this 3 to 4-year-old was raised Mormon. So then I have to ask, it's like, number one, Mormon is a substantially indoctrinated religion. There's not many people that are, sort of Mormon. So you've got this child that's raised probably in Sunday school, where she gets the stories of the Bible, which are heavily involving angels, plus she's getting the story of Joseph Smith as an additional little injection of indoctrination, which means that she gets a big story about an angel that comes and tells you things and is like a magical messenger that comes and tells you things. Now, she doesn't really describe here an angel. I mean, this could be like a fairy godmother from one of her storybooks for all I know. I don't know who the lady in white is. She could easily have said Tony the Tiger told her that her sister Emily, was on the way.
But she didn't.
Right.
She used religious imagery, and that makes it more believable.
She used an imaginary religious symbol instead of an imaginary, Kellogg symbol.
Yeah.
And this then makes it woo. Because if she just said Tony the Tiger and later Emily was born, people would be laughing and saying, yeah, Tony the Tiger got it right? But because she says a woman in white, suddenly it's all Spooksville,
yeah.
right? And so we all are like, ooh, and the assumption, of course, is it's an angel. But my point would be, even if she described a creature with wings that said, I am an angel from God, the point is the little girl has been indoctrinated into religion already. She's heard the Bible stories as a staple, and she has heard, I would be stunned if a Mormon child had not been told the story of Joseph Smith. in some
And actually, I
child's-
wouldn't be surprised if, because it's referred to as a lady,
Yeah.
that there weren't also people who were convinced that perhaps it was a deceased relative,
Oh, potentially
a great
ghost,
grandmother,
maybe.
a ghosty, whatever.
Interesting. I hadn't really considered that. So the next line, keep in mind the hospital has no white rooms where she's at and the nurses weren't wearing white. To me, that was an irrelevancy because I wouldn't think that a nurse would have come in and told her, you have a little sister named Emily. I mean, why would I think a nurse would do that? So of course I think this is the imaginative inner workings of a 4-year-old's brain, which children are extremely imaginative. You talk to a 4-year-old, they'll tell you all kinds of, can you fly? Yeah. It's like, I mean, they'll say anything. So she's got the lady in white, tells her about the little sister. Later on, the mother's pregnant, and the little girl says, this is not Emily. It's not, it's a boy. Now, there's an implication here that I called him on a little later. I said, are you saying that the claim, this is not Emily, is indicative of a male child? Because I'm not reading it that way. There's a story, and this was interesting to me, that what came up in my head was, and it's funny because we're talking about how religious imagery comes forward when you look at these miracle claims, and people have these like iconic sort of religious images when they've been indoctrinated. Well, obviously I was indoctrinated as a child. The first story that came to my mind when I was reading this and understanding the implication here being it's a boy instead of a girl was when Abraham and Sarah are told they're going to have a son. There's like the story of Abraham and Sarah, and they're old, and God comes and tells them they're going to have a child, they'll have a son, and through that son there's all these prophecies that are supposed to be fulfilled. Well, Abraham has a son, but it's not the promised son. Abraham has a son, and then they have to send another little messenger to say, okay, well, that son wasn't the son that we promised, just to make sure you know. This son isn't the son we talked about. There's another one that's coming that's going to be the son. So the idea that you would have this kind of, I'm going to say, like, let's call this a prophecy, because that's what I think is being claimed here, is that there was a prophecy of this child, Emily.
Sure.
So you've got this prophecy, and then you've got this implication that because the little girl says this isn't Emily, that somehow that connects to it being a boy. But it doesn't really. Because there's nothing in claiming that it's not, because it could just as easily be a girl that's not Emily.
Yeah.
So if I say, like, yes, this was a true prophecy of a daughter to come, the fact that it's a girl or a boy, but it's not Emily, is irrelevant. It's not Emily. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter if it's male or female. So this is not a prediction of sex of a child. This is simply saying, this isn't the little thing I dreamed of. This isn't my imaginary sister. So the next story works the same way. The next, he says it happens again, there's another boy. So we've got just these statements that these are not Emily, but no real accurate predictions of sexing a child. Then what you have is that the family decides they're not going to have any more children, but the mother gets pregnant. And I'm like, how many times does that happen?
All the
time. So then she says, this is Emily, and then a little girl is born. And I had added something facetiously when I responded to him, and I said, let me guess, they named the child Emily, thus proving the story true. I mean, a girl is born. And so what it boils down to, all that's really happened in this story, is that this little girl at some point said, my imaginary little sister, Emily, this baby is going to be Emily. I'm going to say this baby is Emily. And then a girl was born. And what got me about it was that this is something that you can do. You can test this miracle in the privacy of your own home with a quarter.
Yeah.
You take a quarter and you flip it, and you say, Matt, heads or tails. Matt says heads or tails, whatever he's going to say. You open it up, and if he's right, he just did what this little girl did. He accurately predicted male or female on this random.
Well, I mean, we're not necessarily talking about predicting the sex of the kid on the first two.
Right, you're not. In fact,
so you got this situation where, here's the deal. If, for example, the first child, the first pregnancy had resulted in a girl, I'm wondering if all of a sudden that would have become Emily anyway. And then we would have had a bunch of correct predictions, just not this one. So she predicted that she'd have a sister, Emily, and even though she got it wrong, didn't quite, maybe she was young, she couldn't have
right.
grasped that, well, you know, what was in her mother's tummy was going to be Emily. And when it came out, oh, it was Emily, and look, there was this prediction. So that would have been confirmation.
Yeah, she thought
the
there
same
was a
thing would have
little bit-
happened
yeah,
if it would have
exactly.
happened with the second one.
Right.
And when her, you know, perhaps her inability to understand the pregnancy thing, or just guessing right, saying this isn't Emily in the first two cases, when those come, when you get around to the third one and she says, aha, this is Emily, she won the coin toss
Right.
on the sex, and then the parents make the prediction come through by naming the kid Emily.
Now, he doesn't ever say that they named the kid Emily. I did that facetiously as kind of like mocking the
Well,
story.
if they didn't, then her prediction was not true. And so my thing is, if I, you know, you can call me twisted, but if I was the parent in this entire situation, when we had a little girl that my older daughter had said, this is Emily, I'd have named her anything but Emily. I mean, just to see. If this is prophecy that's true, can we change this? Now, you know, of course, the family might just start calling her Emily as a nickname because of this traditional story.
funny.
There's 19,000 different ways that all of this could have come to pass in some way that we can weave a story that seems compelling on the surface.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's just so sad to me that what you've got... And then what was interesting, too, in the further discussions...
Well, he starts, I mean, his question at the very beginning betrays a lot about how people think about these things. His question is, how is it that this little girl saw this lady in a white room while she was dead and then predicted the birth of her sister? Why are you asking that? Why? I mean, I don't understand how that's the question that follows this. It is very much, we've talked before about argument from ignorance, where I'm going to accept this answer as the correct answer until somebody can give me a better answer. That's a logical fallacy.
Right.
It is a way of reinforcing one's own delusions and accepting an answer that doesn't have sufficient evidence to support it. So he's basically saying, how is it, other than there is a God and an afterlife who manipulated this little girl and evidently let her drown and die so that she could be revived to predict an entirely trivial event? What other explanation could there be? Well, there could be lots of explanations, but why is it that you're asking for contrary explanations? And it's
Right.
because they've set up a position based on a fallacy.
Right.
That this is the conclusion that I've had this unexplained event, or I've constructed, in this case, an unexplained event.
Yeah, because honestly,
and now
this is
I'm
not
positing an
unexplained.
explanation. I'm saying, this is my explanation for it. Can you give me a better one? And if you can't give me a better one, then by golly, I'm confident that I'm right. That's how way that works.
But it's reworded a little bit later when he says, how is it scientifically possible for a child to predict the sex of a baby before doctors even do?
I can do it.
I can too. And I said, how is it, when I responded to it, I said, babies only come in two sexes. Now, I understand. Now, if she would have predicted a hermaphrodite
Mostly.
and hit that, I'd be more impressed.
Yeah.
But, you know, in general, babies only come in two sexes during any pregnancy I've ever seen. Some people guess boy, some guess girl. How stupid would it be to assert the ones who got it right had supernatural prophetic powers? You cannot be this dumb.
I would email this guy back and tell him to go on YouTube and look for Darren Brown's The System, which demonstrates a mechanism similar to this that people can use to dupe people. For example, I pick 16,000 people and I send 8,000 of them one prediction and 8,000 another prediction. And when I'm done, I now have 8,000 people who I got it right. And then I divide that in half and I send 4,000 one and 4,000 another. And when I'm done with that, I've got 4,000 that have gotten 2 right answers. Eventually you get down to a pool of people who've gotten 6 right answers for you, and that's when you ask them to invest. They have no information about the other thousands and thousands of people who got different answers and incorrect answers. It was completely happenstance. But because they have limited access to information, they think that you're able to predict things that you can't, and therefore you can get them to invest in your scheme. And Darren Brown actually did a special on this. This is the same thing. In a single isolated incident, even if the kid was predicting the sex of the baby, at best the little girl went boy, boy, girl, and got 3 in a row. You know how trivial it is to get 3 coin tosses in a row?
Not only is that trivial, but I have to read this section because it kind of made me laugh. This is actually when I responded toward the end of the discussion. I said, finally, and this was simply something I did for grins, but wanted to share. And even though I respect your sign-off, because he had signed off at that point and said he had no further questions or comments, I said, even though I respect your sign-off, as I'd gone to the trouble, it can't hurt to let you know the results. No reply needed. I try to assume the best-case scenario when someone tells me a miracle occurred and gives me details. I generally, although I don't accept their word as truth, will go with a hypothetical case of, let's say everything they're reporting is 100% true and accurate, and then I examine the story. The only time I stick is when they assert something that is so outside the bounds of reality that your word is just too unreasonable to accept as possible, in which case I would ask for more evidence or explanation from the person. But in this case of Emily's story, I interpreted you to be asserting that you took "this is not Emily" to mean "this is a boy." And you may or may not have intended that, I understand. However, later when you asked how is it possible for a child to predict the sex of a baby, I was actually considering what if she predicted successfully the sex of all 3 children? What if we take her vague statements about the boys as "this is a boy"? And then we say Emily associates at the end and is an accurate prediction of a girl. Well, generally babies come in one of 2 sexes, barring hermaphrodites for the moment, and I know I've already noted this. However, we can test the likelihood of predicting A or B outcomes on a run of 3 accurate guesses in a row, by using a coin toss. And let me just point out that it doesn't even matter if you toss the coin. You could literally be looking at the coin and hiding it from me and ask me to guess, and it would still be the same thing.
Yeah.
Can I get it right? It doesn't have to be a random toss. It just has to be something I can't see that has 2 potential outcomes. So say heads is a boy, tails is a girl. We flip and we ask a subject to predict the outcome. If they can predict 3 outcomes consecutively correct, we have recreated what your sister would have done. If she had predicted all the birth sexes accurately, and this is what was funny, and I did this. This morning, without explanation, I took a quarter and asked my husband to predict coin flip outcomes. He said heads every time and got 3 in a row on the first 3.
It's a miracle!
Thus reproducing your sister's miracle results in a best-case scenario for your story. And again, anyone can try this on their own. Just start tossing a coin. Do 100 tosses and see how many times you get 3 accurate in a row.
Well, you don't even have to do the tosses. The math is really simple. You have a 1 in 8 shot of getting 3 in a row on a coin toss. 3 in a row is, if 1 in 8 is a miracle.
But who would say that what my husband did is miraculous?
Nobody.
I know, and I'm just like, this is what you're presenting me with, and you're asking me how can science possibly explain this? And it's like, this is so mundane, I don't even know why it's impressing you.
Yeah, it's not even really a 1 in 8 because there's not an explicit prediction of the sex of the kids. But even if it were, even if we granted that that was the case, you've taken a 1 in 8 shot and then you've glommed extra irrelevant bits onto the story.
Of them.
Oh, she was once dead.
A lady in white told her to guess heads.
White told
her to guess heads.
Yeah.
And then she had died before she saw this woman who told her that the coin would be on heads. And it's just, you just start building and building this giant superfluous mass of data when really all you're saying is she guessed a 50-50 outcome and got it right.
Yeah, this is exactly how people lose fortunes. This lucky rabbit's foot, the gambler's fallacy, I'm due for a win, I got these 2 right, there's something, I'm in my groove, and now I'm going to get the 3rd one right. I think the miracle here is that the people who are gullible enough to believe this in a religious context haven't lost everything they own to somebody who's just...
To a preacher?
Well, yeah, to a preacher. No. Somebody who's slightly less ethical.
There are some people that were on, that commented on, when I posted like a few items on Facebook about this, and there's more than one person actually said that they do something like the following. One guy said, whenever somebody tells me online that they've lost something they can't find, like their TV remote or their keys, I say, check behind the couch or check in the couch cushions. And he's like, most of the time they check and it's not there, but every now and then someone checks and they find it. Yeah. And he's like, you should see how they freak out. And they're just like, oh my God, you're psychic, you're psychic. He goes, and he's like, 100 times I could do this and it's wrong. He's like, but the one person that hits it, they think it's just so impressive. He's like, you can't believe how impressed they are. And I told him this guy would be like your #1 disciple.
I probably have talked about this before, and I'm not actually exposing anything secret, but I'll tip you to something that happens quite often. Well, I won't say how often. I know that there are a number of professional magicians who make use of this, and that is the principle of getting lucky. I've used it before myself. For example, you're going to make a prediction. I might pull a card out of a deck of cards and place it down on the table face down as a prediction, and then ask you to name a card. Now, almost every time, you're not going to name the card that's on the table. At which point, since you have no idea what I was doing with that card, I'm going to make use of that card in some way to reveal what you picked and go on with the trick that I had planned. But on those rare occasions where you actually do say the name of the card that's on the table,
blow somebody's mind.
That is an impossible trick.
Right.
It's impossible to backwards analyze and figure out, how could he have done this? There's no work there. There's nothing. And it's because it was just happenstance. Now, there are ways, for example, to improve the odds that they're going to say the card that you lay out there. And I'll leave that for people who are in the trade to investigate, or I don't want to blow anybody's secrets too much. But the fact of the matter is, for example, the most commonly named card when you ask somebody just to name a card is the Ace of Spades. Well, if you put the Ace of Spades down every time, you're going to get it right more often than you would, for example, Seven of Clubs or whatever. Probably. I mean, it's a psychological element. But the fact of the matter is, most people aren't going to find that as amazing. There's something, we've attributed some significance to the Ace of Spades, the Death card or the highest of the spades. We give, that it's not surprising that somebody might name it, or that you might have predicted somebody might name it. I think that's at least common enough knowledge where it's not as good of a prediction. It's like it's almost like predicting whether somebody's going to pick the donut or the carrot. When offered, if you know something about their character, if you know they're diabetic, you know that they probably really want the donut, but they'll go for the carrot type thing. So there's lots of ways to make use of that. And it's all about having, in the case of magicians, it's about having information that your audience doesn't have access to. And in the case of this miracle story, it's about nobody having access to that information. And so you make up a grand explanation for how someone might have come to this information.
It's just sad. I mean,
it's a white woman in a white room.
You've shown me like a couple of very tiny card tricks, and it's really funny because the few people I've shown them to, not the trick, but like done the trick on, I've had at least 2 people I can think of tell me that they were so freaked out they wouldn't do it again. Like it freaked them out, and it's a trick. I mean, it's a card trick. It's set up like a card trick. There's nothing spooky about it. I mean, there's like the little story about how you're being psychic, but it's clearly like a joke and a trick. And yet they don't know what the trick is, and so they're so tripped out by the outcome, being so tricky.
Yeah.
That it really psychologically just weirded out a couple people that won't do it again, won't even try it again. And the other thing that was interesting about not just this story, but you kind of touched on it a little bit when you said something about bringing someone back from the dead to then make this mundane prediction. Mm-hmm. The heartbreaker sometimes with these stories is, what about the kids who actually die? So what you have here is this concept of, my sister was brought back from death or the brink of death in order to say that 3 children later, my mother would have a daughter after 3 kids, that she would, pop out a girl. And yet, all these other children who drown and die every year, I guess they didn't have anything significant to say, or, whatever mundane crap they could have added to the world, it wasn't important enough, I suppose, to have them saved. You know what I mean?
Yeah, basically you have some irresponsible parents who left a 3 or 4-year-old near a pool and were so relieved that their daughter wasn't dead so that they didn't lose a child that they, I guess, care about. Although not enough to watch while they're near a pool.
Now, and before anybody criticizes that, because let me say, it doesn't take long, I will admit that it doesn't take long for a child to fall into a pool and get into trouble. And in Florida, we learned that too. That, boy, they can get out of your sight and hit that pool, and boy, it doesn't take long. But they do float for a while before they sink. And one thing that was interesting when I asked for clarification on the girl being dead, in order to demonstrate to me that she was dead, it was explained to me that she had been in the water a long time. So this isn't the case of parents who turn their back for a second.
Yeah, and some kid fell.
Because part of the reason this person wanted to convince me she was dead was because he knew she had been in there for so long that she had sunk to the bottom of the pool. So he's describing a situation where there really was negligence. It's not just a matter of, you know, the way he's describing it would be more than I saw her floating in the pool, grabbed her. It's like she literally was was waterlogged at that point, is what he's trying to say. Yeah. Additionally, he said that how she fell into the pool, which would have to be the word of another 3 or 4-year-old, so I don't know how accurate this could be because nobody was out there that, you know, could have helped her. So clearly there were no adults present. But he claims that another little 3 or 4-year-old was also playing around the pool, fell in and was drowning, and that in an attempt to help him get out, that's how she got pulled in. So what he's describing is a story where there are 2 toddlers running around a pool with no supervision. One of them falls in and is struggling to get out of the pool, sloshing around, struggling to get out. The other 3 or 4-year-old goes over, tries to get them out. That one then falls in. She ends up sitting in the pool so long that she sinks to the bottom. The other one finally gets himself out. By the time he gets inside, then they know what happened. So at the point he gets done telling the story, I'm just like, you have like here a group of irresponsible adults. I mean, I don't know how many people were there. You say you were there, and I don't know if you were one of her younger brothers, or, I mean, you were there, so you were an older brother, you know, you'd have to be. So you're there, and you've got other people there, you've got this mortician there, and I'm thinking maybe there might have been some other, because you said many people, there was many witnesses to this story, was what you said initially. So you've got all these people here, and nobody has the responsibility or the wherewithal to say, where are the toddlers? Isn't there a pool in the back?
Yeah. There's one other aspect to the story that struck me, and it's something that I didn't notice right off the bat, and I don't imagine most people do, and I don't imagine even he has. This whole story is about a paragraph. It's a handful of sentences describing a number of you know, events that are
over years.
Yes, that's the point that I'm getting to. You had a little girl who was traumatized by a drowning and made a claim. Now, I don't remember much from when I was 3 or 4. I'm not even sure I remember anything from when I was 3 or 4. But her mom then gets pregnant and has a kid, which is not the one. So there's at least 9 months.
Right, yeah.
Then gets pregnant, has another kid. That's at least another 9 months. We'll call it a year in between.
Right.
So now, when the third one comes around, we're talking about a kid that's now 6 or 7.
Several years
and,
old, yeah.
And for 2 years or more, the family has kept this story going.
Right.
Is it surprising at all that she might be subject to the gambler's fallacy of the do for? Yeah, this is the one that's Emily. You know, maybe I'm tired of you guys bringing up the story about how I drowned, so now I'm going to call this one Emily.
Yeah, one of the things I actually thought, and like I said, you can't take it at face value, but one of the things I thought was children have very different, just because a child fantasizes about a thing doesn't mean they want it in reality. And you can demonstrate this by every child that goes to see Santa at the mall that refuses to sit on his lap. How many kids sit there dreaming of Santa on Christmas Eve, and I love Santa, I'm be good for Santa, and the moment you take them to see the real Santa, they'd rather die than get on that lap. And they're going to scream and freak, and they don't even want to get near the guy. So there's a big difference sometimes with what a child claims to fantasize about that they want, or that they seem to want, versus what they really want. And for a child of 3 or 4, they're getting significant attention from a parent still. They're at an age where they're getting all the attention. And the idea, this little girl understands sibling, because she said she had a little sister. She called her a little sister. So she understands what a sibling is. And she probably has friends who have sisters that live or share a room or share whatever. And you have to ask yourself, is she one of the kids at that point that if you really said, do you really want a little brother or sister, we're going to go get one for real, that she would be the type that says no. No. Because some kids don't want a real brother or sister. Some kids say, they get jealous and they're just like, I don't like the baby. And you know what I mean? You see that. Some children are really excited about a new baby coming. Some children are not. And there's a lot of people who try to tell parents how to encourage a younger child to be accepting of a new baby, because sometimes there can be this sort of rivalry with the coming child. So what I thought of was, what if she's like 3 or 4, she's at an age where she's getting a lot of attention because she's the baby, and she's got this older brother, right? Because he said this happened to my sister. So she's got this older brother who was there at the time when she was drowning. So she's the baby of the family. She's getting this attention, and suddenly another baby's coming along, and we're going to get the crib, and we're going to get the nursery ready, and and you're going to have to wait because we have to. And what about this new baby? And it's like, this is not. I don't want this baby. And I was like, I wonder if this is not Emily. Is the same way of saying, I don't want a real sibling.
Yeah.
And then the second one comes, and you got the same thing. I didn't like the first one that came. I don't want this one either.
But now with the third one,
right.
I've got 3 brothers.
Right. You've got all brothers going on. You're living in the house here where you're a little bit older now, and it might be kind of fun to have another little girl to do your tea parties with. So I was just like, it's so mundane to me.
It's an oversimplification that ignores the amount of time that passes, all of the other things that happen in this child's life and in the lives of everyone else. But I like the one thing that I keyed in on the time element is you're talking about a span of a couple of 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Who knows how long it was between those kids? I mean, if they were popping them out like quiverfuls, then it might have been quicker. But who keeps that story alive?
Right.
It seems like that there are a lot of factors that are just ignored when you sum this whole up thing in a short little paragraph of girl dies is resuscitated by an incompetent man, and then claims that she has a little sister from some white.
And the other question is, was somebody there recording this story the moment she told it?
Yeah, or did it build?
How do stories grow? How do stories change? I mean, it's just like that telephone game. I tell you, and you tell someone, and you tell someone. And by the time it gets around the room, you've got like a completely different story.
Yeah.
And so, what happened to the story of Emily in all those years?
How much different is the story as it plays in his head versus the story as it plays in the heads of other members of the family?
Yeah.
Now, they may have the same story because they've been sharing it in amongst themselves for a while, but it could also be...
They've developed their own canon.
Let's, it's like 5:15, and as a reminder, we're doing hour-long shows, so we've got like 15 minutes left. There's no phones. We are going to dinner afterwards at Threadgill's, 301 West Riverside Drive. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to join us. If you happen to have better miracle stories, send them to Tracy.
Oh, thank you.
But you can just send them to tv@atheist-community.org, and we'll all get them, and then I won't have to have Tracy do them all.
I didn't even think about it, but you're right. Suddenly I'm thinking like, oh, Lord, am I going to get flooded now with everybody saying, well, that's not a... I mean, because that's the thing. Everybody's always like, well, that person wasn't the best person to...
It happens all the time.
And then I'll get like 1,000... So,
we get emails on a regular basis from people saying, boy, the Christians or the theists who call into your show, they're really poor representatives. Yes. Here's a better one. Why don't you have this person on? Like I get to decide who calls the show. Or they're going to
represent.
Yeah, and then when I always write back and I tell them the same thing, here's the number of the show. You can call whenever you want. Oh, no, I'm not a good representative. Well, then how can you identify the ones that are,
Yeah, if you don't know what's a good apologetic.
So let's, for fun, we'll hit some email.
Sure, do it.
And I won't be giving out any names or reading anything that might embarrass or identify people.
All anonymous.
The first one is, I really feel bad for you guys because when you die, you're all going to hell. And the worst part about it is when you're in hell, you'll not be able to communicate with your atheist friends on earth to tell them to follow Jesus Christ and that being an atheist will put them in hell. I don't even know if we have to, actually say anything about that.
It's just kind of funny. I mean, I wonder, though, will I be able to communicate with my atheist friends in hell?
Well, no, because that would make it too much fun.
Well, I'd be sitting around saying, I hope my friends die, so I'll have someone to talk to. At least we'll have intelligent conversation.
Yeah.
Like.
Hell for the company.
Is that the T-shirt? Hell for the company.
Yeah. My questions are simple. There's no right or wrong answers. I don't care if you do not choose to answer both, but you may answer one that you find most interesting, please. Well, sure, okay. Question number 1. What do you think about Bibles in hotel rooms? Should they get rid of them and why? Could you just ignore them being there? If not, why? What's your take on Bibles in hotel rooms, Tracy?
I don't care.
You don't care?
I really don't. I used one time for grins. I had a friend there, and I was showing her the passages, like I guess it was in Timothy, where it talks about how the all Scripture is inspired. Mm-hmm. And I was like, isn't it funny that when Timothy wrote that, there was no Bible because he was still writing Timothy?
Yeah.
It's like, so what's he talking about? It's like he's talking about, obviously, the Hebrew Bible.
The Hebrew Bible.
Or Hebrew texts, I guess, because there wasn't really a canon at that point either. But, yeah, it's just kind of funny that you can use those Bibles for entertainment if you want to. And And,
There's a lot of ways to use them for entertainment. Jeff D has a game that we've promoted on Nonprofits before, which is called Hide the Bible. So that if you end up staying in a hotel room and you find the Bible, you can hide it. Beth and I hid one. There was a good window treatment with like a shelf almost above the window. So we stuck it up there. From the door, when you come in, you could actually see it because you got the long view of it, but it was up there. Other people have, hidden them under the bed, behind the furniture, especially furniture you can't move.
Right.
And what's cool about this is that it's gotten popular enough where people have gone in to hide the Bible and found a Bible that someone else has already hidden.
Awesome.
So that's fun. I know there are websites and atheist groups that sell stickers that you can put in the Bibles that say, caution, the contents of this book may be hazardous to your health, or the following work is fiction, and any
I was just
resemblance
thinking,
to
though,
real
it's kind of
people
like geocaching in a way. It's like I just wonder if they should call it bibliocaching or something like that, where you like hide the Bible but leave some kind of clues.
Other people just take them. And they're like, oh, I took a Bible, and I was like, that's exactly what they wanted.
Well, yeah,
they're
giveaways.
Yeah, the Gideons and others are putting them in there specifically for you to take them. So people have said, hey,
it's not stealing.
I want to learn more about Christianity and the Bible. Which Bible should I get? And I generally point them to free Bibles, download and software where you can compare different versions, and BibleGateway.com and other free sites. You don't have to actually go spend $70 on an NIV from Zondervan who have copyrighted their version. Or you can go to a hotel room and pick one up for free, a nice physical one that you can dog-ear the pages and highlight and do whatever you want. So I don't really care that much.
Yeah, it's not like having them stuck around under school desks.
But if you don't really need one, I'd say don't take one. Leave it in the hotel room. And here's my thought on that. It's because from time to time they're going to come around and they're going to say, ooh, there's no Bible in this hotel room. Clearly we've done something good and given somebody a Bible that they needed desperately. So we'll replace it with another one. If every time they went into every hotel room, all the Bibles were there, they might start getting the idea that, maybe people aren't that interested in this book. I think that they should, when they put them in there as a way of actually finding out how useful this is, put the Bible in a place and put a little ribbon tape on it and seal it to see if anybody's even cracked that sucker open, because I'm betting 99% of the time nobody's opening those things. His second question, if there happened to be evidence of a deity or a creator, which religion would you think is right? If not religion, what would make you think upon for the details of this God and other spiritual things such as afterlife maybe?
It would depend on the evidence.
Let's say the evidence such as scientists found that a spiritual presence was at the beginning of life.
Okay, so like you're saying, what if they identified like a deistic, at the very least, some kind of deistic thing?
If there was some demonstration that there must have been some
well, that wouldn't tell
designer,
me anything. That would tell me nothing about religion.
It doesn't tell me anything about which one's right. It would probably tell me that all of the religions that have been posited are actually probably wrong, considering they're not actually making those kinds of claims about the start of life usually.
Oh, was it life or the... I guess I was thinking the cosmos, but...
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, I don't know.
So there's an individual who emailed with a solution to the problem of evil. He quotes Bible verses, Job 31:6, Proverbs 11:1, Proverbs 20:23, to say that the reason evil exists is because God isn't all loving, he's all. Just those three letters, all loving and all hating, all knowing and all ignorant.
So he's all logical contradiction.
Yes.
Okay.
I
Which is
agree.
the same as nothing.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to do that one. I don't need conspiracy theory stuff.
That's like saying my husband is both faithful and unfaithful.
Yeah. My spouse is
What in the
all
world does
faithful
that
and
mean?
all cheating. So here's something, and this is going to be kind of difficult because it's from somebody whose English isn't their native language, and we
Okay.
get a lot of that. This individual is, I think, from Portugal. I've just seen a couple of your shows on YouTube and want to congratulate you for your effort and dedication. Thanks. Most of the shows I've seen are a little old, so I don't know if you've evolved since then. But I have to say your argumentation is in most of the cases very basic. Now, without going any further, that kind of reminds me of the you're not addressing the what the real theologians say.
Yeah, I mean, I will have to say we respond to
them-
the claims we're given.
Yeah, get them to call in. Get the real theologians to call in, and we'll address those. But having addressed every one of the traditional arguments for the existence of God and every conceivable claim from, including, Matt Slick calling in with his transcendental argument, to some Yahoo who thinks that if you put a mirror and wrap it with wood and put it under running water, it can suck you into a spirit realm, so you need a rope tied around you with somebody tending it.
Too much Carlos Castaneda.
Yeah, I'm sorry that those people don't represent your particular superstitions, but until you actually present something more, I got nothing to go on. Continuing his email, being condescendent and arrogant doesn't make your speech more reasonable, but it seems you insist on doing that. Okay, that's possibly fair. I've said on a number of occasions, in particular, that I can come across and be arrogant and condescending, dismissive. I'm human. I get frustrated sometimes when people call and are dishonest. The rules are kind of simple. The rules of what I expect when I'm having a conversation with a caller are really pretty simple. I want an honest discussion, an acknowledgement of points. You don't get to, nobody coming on specifically just to preach. If you've made a point and it's been responded to and countered, I'd like some acknowledgement of that before you move on to something else, or just start giving a new laundry list of claims, because religionists in particular can make so many claims, and a very flawed claim in a very short period of time, that it takes 10, 15 minutes to explain. So I'm going to have to put people on hold and cut them off early, etc. There have been people who said, well, don't use profanity. Okay. We tend not to. There have been some occasions where it's going to occur, and it's because I like it. I think it's a useful tool. I think that in some cases it's the best thing you can do, and I realize that it's going to turn some people off, and I do it knowing that that could potentially turn some people off. But I don't necessarily just get on here and start spewing obscenities just to irritate people who are interested in an honest discussion. Usually people get about as good as they give on the show, and if you're willing to have an honest conversation, that's great. However, if somebody makes a stupid argument, I'm fine with saying that's a stupid argument. I'm fine with the fact that I'm dumbfounded that somebody could say anything so obviously stupid.
Yeah, I just have to interrupt because I read ahead a little bit here.
Yeah.
And I have to laugh because this person actually writes that when you read the Bible, you shouldn't be touched by historic facts, but by faith.
Yeah.
It's like, and earlier he's like, all you have are historic facts when you argue with people.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so just ignore the facts and then believe. And there's like an entire paragraph here where he's basically excusing the fact that they can't demonstrate any of this is true by saying that the science wasn't there and they don't have the capacity because it happened 2,000 years ago, as if that's my problem.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's the reason it's stupid for you to be putting this forward as real.
And oddly enough, like the whole hour has now gone by. Let me just hit on this because some people have emailed real quick. Thanks to everybody on the crew, and you can put the credits up and everything else, and we'll see you all again next year. But I don't take it easy on arguments, even when they're presented by my friends and people I like. If you listen to Last Non-Profits, Linnea made an argument that I thought was terrible, and I said so. I don't like Linnea any less than I did before. I don't respect her any less. We've all said dumb things. We've all made bad arguments. My goal is to eliminate them as much as possible. And if I make a bad argument, I want somebody to point it out so that I can correct it for future. It's just that I never make bad arguments. In all seriousness, though, everybody enjoy your holiday season and a Happy New Year, and we'll see you back here in a new season. Hopefully the phones will be working, and maybe we'll